Starting with the test average project, then remember to start or set up a test project, we need to right click on the solution over here and we are going to add a new project. We are in the Visual C# environment, so we go to Visual C#, we choose a test environment, and we want to choose a unit test project with the .NET framework. We're going to name this one test average tests, because we are they generally always end in the name tests. Click OK, and now we've created our project that we can use for unit testing. We get a blank unit testing framework here, and one of the first things then we have to do is to add the resource. So we have to go to add, and I think it actually might be references instead of a resource, and we want to reference the test average, and so it generally comes up with assemblies, but we want to go to projects and click on test average as our resource. And then from here we're going to have to look into the code for form 1, and that actually probably should have been renamed. I don't know if I can still rename it. And so this project is calculating test averages. So and then if we go ahead and take a look at that .cs file and look at what we've got. So we've got namespace test underscore average. We'll need to kind of keep that in the back of our mind because we'll use that. We have several methods that we could actually test. I'm going to focus just on one of them. We could test the average method, we could test the highest method, we could test the lowest method, etc. I've been playing around a little bit with this, and if you notice, I made the highest method public. That's one thing that we're going to need to do in order to test some of these, is that private access doesn't let us actually access them, and I'm not sure how to change that, so I changed it to a public method. So on yours, when you guys are working with them, if your methods are not public, you're going to want to make them public to do the testing, but we'll show you how to set that up. So I'm going to work with testing the highest, and so what we need to do then back in our test scenarios is remember that when you create a unit test, there's kind of like three parts. We have the setup, which they call the arrange. You have the act, which is the actually performing the particular method or calling the method, and then you have the request. The request to test to see if it actually works, which we call an assert. And so when we're going to set up ours, I went ahead and copied the method that I want to test down below here. Or no, what I copied down below was the example from a previous, from the bank account. So you have access to this code. I went to the bank account test methods that we did in the other videos, and I copied one of those over to look at. The other thing that I often will copy over is I will copy over the header from the method that I want to test, because then that's going to tell me what my return type should be, etc. So if I copy that header over, that's going to help me kind of set up my test as well. So arranging means that I have to, when I work with this method, I need to send in an integer array. So that's the input, and my output is going to be an integer. So we often will call those, we're going to work with what's called the expected value. If we look at the sample code down here, let me kind of bring that up so it's easier to see. We often work with what's called the expected value, and with the actual value. So the actual value and the expected value are the ones that we want to compare. So when I'm setting this up, I'm going to use those variables. Okay, so I need in my arrange, which is the arrange part is all the values, variables that you need to set up basically it's a fake scenario. Okay, so we're setting up a scenario just to test it, and so I need an integer array, and I'm going to call my integer array just my test array, and we're going to fill it with some values, and it doesn't matter what we use. We're going to have some numbers in there, and it's going to be looking for the highest value. So I know that the highest value is 121, so I know the expected result should be 121, and that is an integer value. So I have my expected value set up, and I have my as an integer, and it's telling me it's not used. We will use that here in just a little bit. Next is the actual act, which is where we're going to say, well, I'm going to get what is returned, and so my actual value is going to be, I'm going to expect an integer value, and it's going to be what's returned from calling highest, and I'm going to send in the parameter test array because highest takes in an array value. It's going to yell at me because there's some other things that we're going to do. And then I need an assert statement, and this is really why I copied the other code, because I'm not comfortable enough with these yet to do assert statements quickly. So I'm going to copy this assert statement, and then we're going to work with that. So I've already assigned my actual value in the act, and the reason that I'm assigning that here in the act is that I'm calling the highest method in this line of code at line 19, so that's my act, is calling that method and getting a return value. And then we're going to assert dot equals and check the expected against the actual for a difference of 0.001. Your margin of error can differ based on what you're working with, and we will just say highest value matches, something like that. Now we're going to have to deal with this error message that we're getting here. And so it says highest does not exist in the current context. So one thing we have to do is to change our import statements. Because we are working with the other form, I need to import the namespace from the other form. So that's test underscore average. And so import test underscore average. And then there's going to be some other things that we need to change. Oh, I said import. It needs to be a using statement. So we're using test underscore average. That doesn't quite cut it, and the reason for that is highest is a method on that form. So I actually have to create an instance of test average. So I'm going to create my new test average. This is going to be a temporary one. It's going to be a new test average. I believe I can do that. And then I'm going to tell it that I'm going to call temp from that test average. So if I look temp dot and then highest is one of the methods that shows up. And so I know that that's supposedly a little bit correct. Now the last thing it says here, the type form is not defined in the assembly that is referenced. You must add a reference to the Windows. So we might need to also add the Windows reference. So there's a couple ways that I went about doing this, and I don't remember what exactly worked. So we're going to try to add a reference to the Windows forms. That's going to be in assemblies, and I think it was Microsoft .windows.forms or system.windows.forms right here. We're going to add that reference. That may or may not solve our issue, and it seems to have solved the issue. So the other thing is then that my test appears to be written. I'm going to test it out. My expected value is 121 from this integer array that I'm sending in. We have to get our debugging or our testing window over here then. So if we go to test, I need to open up the testing window, which is called the Test Explorer. I'm going to enlarge that just a little bit so we can take a look at it. And then when I run the tests, I'm just going to run all the tests. I only have one, but I'm going to run all the tests right now. If I have more tests, I might run them individually, but it's just as easy to run them all. And I'm looking for a green bar over here on the left. That's what I'm doing. So this is going to determine whether my unit tests are working correctly. takes a little bit, and it says thumbs up, it went well. In order to make sure that my tests are actually working, I could put in another value here. Let's just say I could put in anything. Let's say my expected value was 5. If that's the case, when I run all the tests, I would expect that I would get a red light over here. It's going to turn red. And we don't need the data sources window open, so I could close that. And so the test failed. So we just did another example of a unit test. And so one thing that you're going to have to look for, and now I'm going to change it back, is now you're going to have different tests to write on different methods, but you can basically kind of use this as a model. Again, similar to the other ones, I will post this code so you have this code as well. And don't forget that you are going to have to, let me just show you what happens if I make that one method private. So if I made that method private, it's not going to allow it access, and so I believe it's going to give me an error message right here. So it says something about inaccessible due to protection level. It does say show potential fixes. I don't know what that potential fix would be. It might be their fix is to create a public method. So temporarily we would have to go back in, and whatever method we want to change, we need to change it to public so that we have access to it. I'm sure that there's another way and a better way to work around that, but that's what I have for right now. Just to give you a little bit more practice and go through this one more time quick, I'm going to write another test method. So I added bracket test method public void test lowest, which also means I should have named this one test highest up here. I might change that right now. So you want the test to kind of reflect on what it's testing. And then basically I can actually steal almost all of this code. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it down here. So I'm going to test high and test lowest. The lowest in this list right here would be expected to be 1. So if I use those expected and actual values, then I can often reuse the arrange, act, and assert from other methods, and then I could say the lowest value matches if that's going to ever return that value. And actual here, then instead of calling highest, I want to call lowest. But remember, so if I try to actually call this, and I would do int actual temp dot, I don't see that method lowest. I'm looking for, and the reason for that, remember, is that I need to change it to a public method. I was looking to see if it would give me highest, but so lowest is a private method. I'm going to make it public just for these testing purposes. So then I'm going to come back here and we'll see if I can get it to actually run if I do temp dot lowest. And let's see if it pops up now. Temp dot and lowest shows up now where it didn't before. And I want to send it the test array, and that should then be it. It's not liking something, so let's see what's happening. And it's expecting a semicolon somewhere. Or did I not copy correctly? Okay, it wasn't a semicolon. I just need to assign this value. And so now I've got two test cases here. If I go back and I run all of the tests, it should run both tests now. And we should get green on both tests. So we will see what our results are when this runs. Dig down in here, it's showing you your lists. You got test highest, test lowest, and they both ran successfully. To make sure that it is calculating correctly, I can also see if it's going to run a failed test. And on this one of our tests, I think I just selected the wrong thing. So I need to run the test and run all tests and just instead of just the regular run. and one of my tests should pass and the other one should fail. So here, if you dig down, you get a green on test highest, but you get a red on test lowest. The last thing is that they ask you to test for an exceptions error here, and I played around with that a little bit, and it's a little bit more complicated. So for right now, we're not going to worry about that exception testing. And if you did see that little error message that popped up on my screen just a minute ago, that was because I was trying to work on running an exception when the data file was opened, and so I had changed the name of the data file just to see what might happen. So I'm going to upload this code so you guys have it to run from. I'll go back and make sure that my tests both pass correctly so that we have high test, low test running, and then you guys will have access to this on the website. That is it.